Hey guys, welcome back to the Splat Moto YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about corners, how to get your bike through tight spaces on technical trails and especially hard enduro. There's a lot of funky maneuvers that we can use to take the bike through spaces that don't seem like it's possible to get through while turning.
By manipulating the bike, lifting the front end, using the clutch and throttle to hold it up in the air. And what kind of angles do we use?
Some maneuvers and techniques that aren't found on your everyday flow trail or the motocross track.
If you guys didn't see last week's video, I had my friend Ben, who hasn't been riding a ton, but now that I've been injured, I've been asking him to help me, and he's willing to practice and try and get some of this stuff down, even though a lot of this stuff is some challenging concepts like the one we're working on today.
Oddly enough, a lot of the concepts that we're going to be using today are ones that I've been talking about in my recent YouTube videos in the past week's episodes.
We're going to take a lot of the clutch and throttle concepts that we've been trying to develop in the last week's videos and put it into some real world situations. Before you go just extreme billy goating, let's make sure we hammer home this concept of creating space.
Even a lot of just technical trails have situations where you can't just steer the bike. You need to account for where the rear wheel is going to go. So for example, the corner we're working on today has a feature in the middle that if we just turn, we're going to run our swing arm into it, we're going to run our peg into it. In other words, there's not enough space. So we're actually going to overshoot the corner a little bit so that we can give the rear tire a little bit more room to deal with, pivot the front end over. We can do this in different ways. A more advanced rider could pivot it all in one shot. Today we have Ben who's helping us. He's going to try and do it one step at a time.
Now I say this often, but it takes a while to translate the things that we've learned on flat ground onto the trails. We tend to get a little bit more tense and tight when we're doing things on the trails because we're nervous of high siding and rolling our bike down the hill or hurting ourselves. Now this has been practicing back at our compound, and you can see he has the ability to let the clutch all the way out while coordinating specific body movements at the same time. As soon as we got him out into a real world trail with a little bit of consequences and pressure, he became hesitant to let the clutch all the way out, and he was afraid to keep his body weight back like we practiced at home. Notice his body and his head actually come forward. He's sort of working against the front end coming up. This is a common issue with beginner riders once we take them out into the actual trails. This can be a natural part of the learning curve, but we need to face it with some courage and bridge that gap of what we learned on the flat ground to actual trail situations. Watch Ben's body language here compared to Sam's attack. Notice how Sam really commits to throwing his weight back as he's letting the clutch out, and then he continues to kind of give it revs and keep the throttle up, but notice the rear wheel, it doesn't spin hardly at all. He gets full traction. Now Sam's a pretty tall guy, so just him throwing his weight back really hard is almost enough to lift the bike up on its own. You can see he even takes a second to let the clutch all the way out, and then it comes all the way out for just a second and then back in. Again, it's not going to be the exact same every single time. When we're dealing with this low RPM range, the most important thing is to keep the bike running, so a constant feed of throttle while trying to get the best traction we can for each situation. Being able to read the terrain and knowing how much traction it's going to give you will help determine how quickly you should let the clutch out. For example, I'm in some gravelly loose stuff here. I needed to establish pressure and forward drive instantly.
Now there's always the fear of the unknown in a lot of situations like this. A couple details to take note of. You really want to pay attention to what kind of ground you're on. What angle is your tire on a hillside, or do we have full contact patch with our rear tire? Are there rocks underneath our rear tire? What kind of ground are we on? Will it hold the tire if we spin? So we want to be considerate of what kind of power we use. And it's why in my previous videos I like to talk about being able to keep the bike running at a low RPM range and not stalling, so that we can get really good traction but also be able to keep the bike running with the clutch and throttle as the RPMs really get low. That's something that takes a while to get a feel for. A lot of it is just that feel of the clutch and throttle. Now another thing to consider, there's more time to work with when we pop the front end up in the air. The better we get and the more feel we get with our clutch and throttle and our ability to feel that engagement of the rear tire in simpler situations, the more patient we're going to be, the more time we have to deal with as the front end comes up. For example, you can see in this clip, Sam really throws his body weight back, but then as it's coming up, he starts to bring his body weight forward. There's time for your mind to compute as you send the front end up. What's the trajectory of the front end? How fast is it going to come up? And if it is going to come up too fast, we can start to pull the clutch in or bring the body forward. There's multiple levels of control that we have. It's not just, it's exactly this one way for every situation. We need to be able to kind of adapt, and the more control we have, the more ability we have with our controls, the more comfortable and patient we're going to be with it.
So pop it up a little higher and then let it down slow. There it is. There it is. Look at that. More of a lean will give me a quicker rotation. Got to be careful though, if the rear tire runs into this, if there's things in front of the tire, that might grab the tire and it might not want to pivot over quite as fast, or it might just grab it and stop. Well, you've anticipated it to go over. Now you go over, generally that causes a tip over.
Our ability to feel exactly what the clutch finger is doing for us and how it's controlling the rear wheel will simultaneously determine exactly what the finger needs to continue to do in terms of specific movements with it. It's very small movements with the clutch finger, and there's no exact science per situation.
I'm also utilizing a little bit of backwards roll too. So as I'm going backwards, I'm using that as an opportunity to pop the front end up a little bit easier, and almost like using my clutch as a brake going in reverse. So I'll roll forward, roll back, use that to pop it up. Now I can keep that low RPM, and just as I'm basically controlling most of it with the clutch, slight inputs with the throttle, slight increase with the throttle here and there. But even when the clutch comes all the way out, I'm still just like above the revs, because if I don't, it'll be something like this. You know, the front end will pop out because you got good traction to the rear tire, but there's nothing left in the engine to keep propelling the motorcycle forward. So work on that, popping it up high and letting it down slow with the clutch. So the clutch is going to come all the way out initially as we throw weight back. Once the front end reaches the point where we feel it's high enough, then we just slightly pull the clutch back in to control that wheel spin. While we're doing that, we're keeping the revs up. I can't stress that part enough. All this clutch and throttle stuff is so complicated. So give yourself time, be patient with it. Pop it all the way up, let it down slow.
I recommend practicing this drill alone as much as possible. Practice keeping the body weight back, maybe even sitting farther back on the seat, and just getting comfortable popping the front end up and then letting it back down slow. You can even give yourself specific marks to land your front wheel on if you want to get even more accurate with it. A lot of times we can throw our body off to the side instead of leaning the bike so far, because when we start to lean on side hills, we start to lose contact patch with our rear tire, and it can cause us to get off balance really quick.
Look how much effort that is.
We need to learn how to minimize the lean of the bike and maximize the position of our body to maintain traction. We talked a lot in last week's video about this body position, so make sure to go watch that video if you want to learn some ways of getting more comfortable using the clutch in that off the side of the bike body position. It can take a while just to get the strength to be in this position, and tricky because you need to be off the side of the bike but also throw the body back while putting all your weight into that outside peg. One of the skills that I've tried to hone relentlessly is just the ability to operate in a low RPM range at slow speeds without stalling. That's the hardest part. I find a lot of people have a tough time riding in a low RPM range without stalling. Once gravity starts working against them, or they're riding through rocks or uphills or whatever, it's very easy to stall. So anticipating where your rear tire is going to be, maintaining revs constantly with the throttle, while making the smallest adjustments with the clutch at all times.
All right, you guys, after going through all the footage I got that I wanted to share with you in this video, I decided I'm going to make a part 2 where I keep talking about this subject. We haven't even gotten to downhill corners, and I always say in all my videos, there's always more to talk about. I'm trying to give you things that I think are good takeaways and the things that I see the majority of the people struggling with. Of course, there's always more nuances to talk about. When I'm working with people privately, we get into a lot of details and I can identify specific little issues that each rider has. But because there's more to talk about always, I ask that you guys use your best objective reasoning when you're out on the trails. Try to be smart out there, minimize the risk. If you don't have a ton of confidence to go for some big pivots out in sketchy terrain, just go find a smaller section or easier areas to practice in that are a little bit less dangerous to get comfortable making those moves. And then when you do go out on the trails, realize there's going to be a learning period. Sometimes it gets ugly out there when we're practicing. It goes for anything in life. So don't give up if you guys are really hungry to learn this stuff.
All right, you guys, if you like the content that I'm making, help me by supporting the brands that help me. Astra handlebars, incredible. They need their own video. The Aurora Bend 35 mil is what I have on this XCW 250. Also, another big one that came in handy for us today was the Seat Concepts seat. This is a lower seat. Christmas is coming up. If you guys want to help one of your buddies who's getting into hard enduro, these seats help you get closer to the ground. So they're not quite as comfortable. I took a gamble when I got it because I knew that it was going to be shaved out. Is it going to be awesome everywhere when I'm trying to moto down the trails? Not necessarily, but you always have the option of putting the stock seat back on. But for days like today, when it's nice to be able to get our feet to the ground, especially with beginner riders learning technical trail riding and balance, it's really nice. Even for me and Ben, who aren't the shortest people, this seat has saved me a lot. I can get to the ground, whether I'm on the high side or the low side or whatever. It just helps minimize the tip overs out there. So if you guys like the video, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you in next week's video.